Sure.
Within about a week, we'll have that up on an ICCTE YouTube channel that you'll be able to come in and view that or use it in a class or whatever.
So I know that my colleagues were supposed to join, Ken Pudlis and the rest of my colleagues from the university at the School of Education, but they're not here yet, so I thought I'd record it for them. But if you're doing that, that's great.
Yep,
Great.
we've got it going right now. So,
where are you from, Adrian?
I'm from Trinity Western University.
Oh, wonderful.
Hi, Karen. Good morning.
Good morning.
Hi, Karen.
Hello.
This is Sharon Merritt
Morning.
from FPU.
Oh,
Looks like
Sharon.
I'm one of the first to join, looks like.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Thanks for doing this. It's going to be really interesting.
Yes, I'm looking forward to some conversation.
We're very
Yeah.
excited about it.
Great.
Let me add my greetings. Hi, Karen.
Hey, Dr.
you are.
Barrett. It's so fun to say that.
Thank you. It's very fun to hear it. Thank you. Thank you for including us down here. We really appreciate it. Sharon and I are both from Fresno Pacific. Lovely
Perfect.
group of us.
I'm going to mute myself now.
Okay.
I'm going to do the same thing.
All right.
So Tom and Karen, we're going to be starting here in just a couple of
Turn
minutes.
off that music.
And I will go ahead and continue to kind of monitor people as they come in. But after I make my introduction, I'll turn it over to you. And you can go for it. And
Perfect.
if you have any issues with the technology, just let me know and I'll do my best to help.
All right.
Yes, and we're glad you're all here, whether you're in the Pacific time zone or elsewhere. I know we've got several that are from the East Coast as well, so welcome to all of you. It's a beautiful sunny day here in Newburgh where I'm at, and I don't know what it's like for you, but I'm really grateful this morning that Tom and Karen were willing to do this for us, and I know they intend this to be a somewhat interactive session, so looking forward to all of you getting involved in one way or another.
I'll just say my hello, John Walcott from Calvin College in Grand Rapids, Michigan. Glad to be joining you today.
Welcome, John.
John?
Thank
Good
you.
to have you here.
Okay, folks, a couple of notes on the technology before I introduce the session. I'm going to be muting you all just for the time being because we have a total of 31 people registered for this, which is a pretty astounding number. And if everyone shows up, it might get a little dicey on the audio. So when it's time for discussion and questions, we'll bring you back in. So that's the first thing to be aware of. Second thing is I need to make sure that Tom and Karen are not muted so that they can actually talk to us this morning.
Okay.
So welcome to you all. A couple of notes on the technology. We are recording and you have the opportunity to chat, text chat. You can find that on the toolbar, which would either be at the top or the bottom of your window. If you kind of mouse down or up, a toolbar will appear. You also have the opportunity to raise your hand if you want to ask a question. You can find that under the participants tab. And when we get time to question and answers and discussion, if you want to ask a question or make a comment, if you'll raise your hand, it will be easier for me to moderate that so that it's not difficult for Karen and Tom to know who's trying to talk. But you're welcome to put anything into the text chat you want. If you want to ask a technical question of me in particular, you can address that to the moderator, or I think it may be called the host in the system. Other than that, I think you've all made it here, so that's the most important thing about the technology. I'm sharing my screen now for this opening slide. You may like to, at the top of the icons where you see the thumbnails of the people's heads, on the far left of the upper bar, you can actually mute those photos so that you can see the full screen if you want. And in fact, when Tom begins sharing his slides, you're going to want to see the full screen. So if you understand what I'm saying, you can kind of close that window up so you just have a little bar and you'll be able to see. Now you may want to see your colleagues too, but we'll come back to that, later when we want to talk with each other. So I'm Scott Headley. I'm the editor of the ICCTE Journal, although that's really just a name. Our managing editor, Susanna Thornhill, who does 90% of the work, is actually here. And welcome, Susanna, and Jenny Harrop and Tom Buchanan are also on the editorial staff who are joining us today. So I give thanks to those folks and the good work they do. The journal's been in existence for 14 years. And we primarily serve the ICCTE community. We do have a double-blind review process, and we're always looking for manuscripts. But we're also today introducing the notion of a special issue of the journal for next fall, and Tom and Karen will talk about that later on during their presentation, and really hoping to solicit authors for that issue. Let's see, the session will be about 45 to 50 minutes long. Tom and Karen will begin with some slides and some discussion, then they'll open it up for some interaction. So be prepared, as I said, for questions or comments. We will need to end promptly at 9:30, but our time here on the West Coast, but we may need to end a little early, just depending. But I'll close the room then and turn off the recording, but if you want to keep talking with folks, you can take it offline. So I'm glad to introduce Karen and Tom to you today. They are husband and wife, but they're also colleagues of mine here in the College of Ed at George Fox. Karen directs our Doctor of Education program and is a professor of ed leadership, and Tom is a professor in our Master of Arts in Teaching program and teacher ed. And I believe you're going to be in for a treat today as they've worked hard and long on their scholarly agenda. I think they have some important things to share. And I think they're also very, very interested in having you share some of your insights and experience as well. So I'm glad you're here. I'm going to now turn the hosting over to Tom and let Karen and Tom move ahead with their presentation.
All right. Well, we want to begin by thanking Scott and the editorial team for bringing together this community of teacher educators. It's so exciting for us to see so many people interested. And we want to thank all of you for dedicating a portion of your day today to think about preparing candidates to work in effective ways with family and community.
Hello, everybody. In today's webinar, we are going to share some of the critical elements of the conversation around preparing teachers to collaborate with families and communities. And some current thinking in the literature in hopes that one of these elements will inspire you to do some writing for the special issue of the journal that's coming up. Additionally, we're going to share some research that we are engaged in that might be helpful to you, to us, as we prepare our teacher candidates. For the first part of the webinar, Karen and I will be presenting information as it has been outlined on your handout. We will be asking you some questions along the way. You can feel free to answer in the chat window or just jot down an answer on paper there at your desk. Or if you happen to be with a colleague in the same room, feel free to do your sharing with them. The second half of this webinar will be a conversation between us as colleagues, and I'm really excited about bringing together a group of people who are interested in a Christian perspective on how we prepare teacher candidates to engage with families. And so that really is a part of this webinar that we are very excited about. Feel free to make notes or comments or questions that you might have as we go along that you might want to share with us later in the webinar.
Perfect. Well, as we dig into the research literature on this topic, there are a couple of things that are quite clear. The first being that students benefit in all kinds of ways when families are engaged in the educative process. I mean, everything from stronger achievement to increased graduation rates, reduced absenteeism, better social skills, decreased behavioral issue. There's just a host of benefits. But the second thing that's quite clear is that teachers, both in service and pre-service, feel unprepared to do this work with families. This is in spite of the fact that relationship or partnership with families is a strong expectation in teacher preparation standards. Did you know that in 7 out of the 10 INTAS standards, there's mention of partnership or relationship with families? And then, of course, the professional specialty standards also have that expectation. So this piece is a puzzling problem of practice for all of us as teacher educators, and we've got to take some ownership with that problem of practice. So I'd like you for a moment to do a bit of thinking with either who's in your room, or you can even jot some things on chat. But why is it that you think this problem exists? So I'm going to give you a minute to put some thoughts down or to chat with colleagues. What might be some of the explanations for this problem of practice? Lack of experience. I see a focus on preparing students in content. Yes. Lack of opportunity. Yeah, absolutely. Yes, students do report their fear about doing this work. We also have a really crowded curriculum. For us, it's not a big assessed piece in EdTPA. It's not one of the literacy or math focuses. So there's a lot of good reasons. And yet, if the preparation, if students lack the preparation, then they also are missing some of the great benefits that can come from that. Many programs don't have a class specifically dedicated to this topic, but it's integrated throughout the curriculum. I know that's true for us in all of our formats of teacher preparation at George Fox. Sometimes when things are integrated and they aren't monitored or assessed well, they just get lost. And so I think that happens a lot as well. At a recent ATE conference, we had a chance to hear and interact in a small group with Dr. Ken Zeichner from the University of Washington. Zeichner's done a lot of influential writing in the area of family and community engagement, and he really had an impact on us. In reading a piece by he and his colleagues in the Journal of Teacher Education, a statement that they made simply stunned and challenged us. They said,
"It is ironic that so little of this work goes on in teacher education programs across the United States, when so many of them have claimed the mantle of social justice as the basis of their work."
Honestly, this statement felt really personal to us and caused some deep reflection for us, because in our program, social justice is more than a professional responsibility or a moral imperative, but it runs much deeper into our university's theological foundations and our own personal faith commitments. So Tom's going to share a little bit of what we've been thinking about around this notion of integrating our faith with this particular topic, and I hope that we will then do a lot of sharing at the end of the webinar.
George Fox was founded on Quaker principles and commitments, and these are spoken of as something called Friends testimonies. And an example of that is, Friends hold that all people are equal in the eyes of God and have access to the inner light. This profound sense of equality, ideally, leads friends to treat each person with respect, looking for that of God in everyone. In practice, listening to the voices of each member of the community and valuing their perspective is important among the friends. I'm going to say that again because I want to emphasize it because it's so closely related to this idea of working with families and communities. Listening to the voices of each member of the community and valuing their perspective is important. These theological roots have caused our College of Education to embrace social justice as a critical element of our teacher education conceptual framework. For Karen and I, who were not raised Quakers, we've been influenced strongly by this Quaker element that's in the DNA at George Fox University. And also that Zeichner comment challenged us, it caused us to consider how we might reposition family community knowledge so that it holds a stronger place in our teacher education curriculum. I'd like you to think, pair, share for a moment. What I'd like you to do is I'd like you to think about how, from a Christian perspective, sorry, I went to the next slide too soon. I'd like to think about how, from a Christian perspective, what are some of the things that might drive a teacher educator to consider putting more emphasis on family-teacher engagement? What are some of the motivators for a Christian teacher educator? For example, on your handout, we noted a few that you might think about: Christian calling and ethics, social justice, learner achievement, a whole child perspective, strengthening the voice of families. What are some things that might drive a Christian teacher educator to want to strengthen family engagement in their teacher education curriculum? Take just a moment, chat about that, think about that with a colleague.
Yes. Yes, first teachers.
Give that just a few more seconds here.
Wonderful.
In the special issue of ICCTE that is going to talk about how we as Christian teacher educators prepare our candidates, it would be wonderful to see some articles on the why behind why it's important for Christians to do this work. In addition to these Christian principles, there are some theoretical perspectives that we are using in our work. For example, Dewey would say preparing candidates to teach students in ways that prepare them to be contributing members of the community is really important. And this requires teachers to understand the communities where they teach. We've deeply considered Bronfenbrenner's ecological systems theory. This is a framework that can help us to understand and explain the potential benefits when teachers and families interact. The theory posits that the primary engine of human development is the interplay between an individual and the people and things in one's immediate environment. Bronfenbrenner identifies a particular system of interactions he calls the mesosystem. You'll see it as one of the inner rings there, that occur when a developing person moves into a new setting, such as from home to school. Those who interact with the learner in both home and school settings can have an impact on development. Thus, teachers who make an effort to interact with the home and caregivers or parents who make an effort to interact with school may be an influence for good in the development of individual learners. There is a great discussion of the importance of Bronfenbrenner's theory in a book that came out just last month called How People Learn Too. This book is a consensus study report put out by the National Academies of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine. The report represents the consensus of multidisciplinary science on how people learn. The first part of the report is a discussion of the role of culture in learning and development. It notes that recent research makes it far more clear that every individual's learning is profoundly influenced by their cultural context. The book states, learning does not happen in the same way for all people because cultural influences pervade development from the beginning of life. Other research literature indicates that taking time to listen to and to build relationships with families can help teachers gain meaningful insights into children's cultures. In the ICCTE journal, we would be really interested in seeing diverse perspectives, diverse theoretical perspectives. Perhaps there's another theory that you find really important to this work that might be the direction you would take in a submission. We're really interested in this journal of seeing a variety of perspectives, and it would be wonderful if not all of us agreed when we open up that journal. We saw different perspectives. That would be awesome. Karen is going to share another concept in the literature that we have found particularly meaningful.
All right, so really thinking about making a difference on the ground with students. When we dig into the literature, there seems to be a shift in the last 20 years. You know, Joyce Epstein's been writing about this for a long time, and she now is writing about the shift in the literature. We like the way Zeichner's 2016 article, it's on the back of your handout. We love the way he captures this typology by talking about involvement, engagement, and solidarity. I don't have time to go into all of those today. I'm going to lean into the engagement piece. But first of all, involvement, that approach creates an opportunity for school staff or teachers to share their knowledge and expertise with family. So we see this involvement typology in a lot of the things that have been going on for 50 years, you know, teacher newsletters, back to school nights, parent-teacher conferences, curriculum nights, where teacher is the expert feeding into parents. Certainly there are times where that's really appropriate. However, where I want to sit today for us is the engagement paradigm. Engagement comes from a completely different perspective. This approach leans into the knowledge that families bring and can share with teachers. So teachers become hungry to learn from parents about their children, about their home environment, so that they can use that knowledge in their practice. The engagement paradigm includes a shared responsibility between teacher and family, a reciprocal relationship. And it would include things like families being involved in the decision-making around educational goals for their children, true two-way communication, an exchange of knowledge, parents sharing the funds of knowledge from their home environments, those kinds of things. So in our own practice, engagement is where we're wanting to make a difference in our teacher education program and leaning into building those reciprocal relationships, engaging candidates face-to-face with the families they serve. These reciprocal relationships don't just happen because we name them. I think we do that a lot sometimes. We name important things, we sit with philosophy, but they have to be intentional. And so we're going to be talking about leaning into some intentional skill development. As we think about the teacher education curriculum and how to turn the tide to more better prepare candidates for this work, I want to talk about two of the four things that are on your handout that Tom and I are currently considering. The first one being redefining what content is needed to prepare candidates. and then repositioning that content as bigger rocks in the curriculum. And in other words, valuing it more. As we dug into the literature a bit, it appears that a lot of the curricular content should be around skill development rather than activity development. I'll talk a little bit more about that in a moment. But I mean, think about how many times you've had students during student teaching create a newsletter to go home to families. I would consider that to be an activity development. And where we want to sit today a little bit is with skill development. Prior to that skill development, though, there's a dispositional piece. We need to help candidates really see families as a child's first and most significant teacher, and their home as a very important learning environment. And candidates not only bring their knowledge and expertise, but they're hungry to learn from the family about the child. And so that knowledge becomes foundational to all the work that they're going to be doing in their classroom. When we think about skill development, at the top of the list is building relationships, and more specifically, building culturally responsive relationships. This new work that came out last month, How People Learn Too, is such a new and important piece, and it leans very heavily into building these sorts of culturally responsive relationships where candidates really seek to learn from families. And then they lean into the shared goal that both teacher and families have for creating an education where their child can really grow and flourish. That's a shared commitment, and we need to teach our candidates to take the lead in that. In an article that we wrote in Improving School, we talk about 6 steps for building culturally responsive relationships. So don't have time to talk through all those skills, but you certainly can access those. We can come back to them in a conversation session if you'd like. Yet another skill that we see that needs to be developed is conflict resolution skills and skill building around dealing with challenging people. It's interesting, I'm teaching a doctoral class right now, and the folks in the class are either in-service teachers or teacher educators. We took on this topic this last block, and every one of them said, why am I just now learning these skills? Why didn't somebody teach me this when I was a classroom teacher? I struggled with this all the time. And so it's become very clear to me that that's a skill that's really quite important. So skill building, thinking about what the content of the curriculum should be is an important piece that we're really playing with right now. Tom's going to share with you an investigation that we've been doing where we've taken some of these notions and done some work with MAT students. And so take it over, Tom.
So a couple of years ago, Karen and I were flying back home from an ATE conference where we had heard Zeichner give a keynote. And we were so excited about this idea that we thought might really help our candidates. Our candidates are worried. They're actually pretty concerned about the part of their job that means they have to work with parents. And Zeichner helped us think about a shift that we might help them make, where rather than going and telling parents things, they approach parents with the idea that they're going to gain knowledge from those parents. And in fact, we've discovered that that paradigm shift is really helpful to our candidates. We believe that asking candidates to engage with families in knowledge-building ways makes a difference. So while we're on the plane flying home from that ATE conference, we started working on what's something that we could have candidates do that shifts their thinking from telling parents things to gaining knowledge from the parents. And so we had the framework of an activity we would ask students to do during their clinical practice setting while they were here. And it involved them choosing one of 3 what we called community knowledge activities. The first activity was developed by Sleater. It's called Community Conversations. And in Community Conversations, the candidate visits with several members of the community and asks questions that we recommended, such as, what do you see as the main assets of this community? Sleater also developed another activity that we let students choose from that was called the Neighborhood Walk. She talks about that in a 2017 article. And in the Neighborhood Walk, the candidates spend time in the neighborhood of the school observing, listening, and paying attention to things. The point here is, as the students go into the neighborhood, they're not there to tell the neighborhood anything. They're there to gain knowledge from the neighborhood. It's a shift in their thinking. They had a third choice that they could choose from, and this one we've actually been most excited about at this point in our research. It's called Family Conversations, and it was developed by Amatia. And in Family Conversations, the candidate arranged for conversations with the parents of a learner who is in their classroom. And they listen for the parent talking about strengths and talents. Again, the point here is for the candidate to gain knowledge from the family. So we set out to look at the reflections that the candidates wrote about these activities that they participated in. That reflection data became our data for studies that we've been doing over the last couple of years. And we've been looking at it qualitatively. We've been doing content analysis of the study. And our basic question is, how does a research-informed assignment that asks candidates to engage with families and communities shape the development of emergent teachers? And then we had some sub-questions. And we really dug into this data, looking at all the content that's in it. And I want to share with you 3 initial findings that we've already shared at conference and written about that we're pretty excited about. The first one is, when these candidates set out to gain knowledge from the community, from families, the development of emergent teachers is shaped by parent insights into the strengths, talents, and attributes of learners. Some examples are teachers would say, wow, I didn't know this kid was doing karate several times a week and that they're doing really well. I had no idea that this student in my classroom is so skilled as a piano player. Or I didn't know that this child has lots of responsibility for helping their disabled sister at home. All kinds of things that the candidates learned by talking to the parents. Even more exciting is that they brought that to their classroom practice. There's lots of evidence in these reflections that the development of emergent teachers is shaped by the application of parental knowledge to classroom design and practice. My favorite example is a high school science teacher who was having a real challenge with one of her students. And when she interviewed the mom said, it's all about basketball with this kid. You got to connect things to basketball. And so the teacher set out to connect a lesson about microscopes to basketball and was very intentional about it. And the teacher candidate in the reflections say, this was the first time that I actually saw this student engaging in a lesson and doing the work. Because I made connection to something that the parent told me would really, connect with this kid. Another thing that we saw that was exciting to us is that the development of emergent teachers is shaped by shifting personal assumptions about working with families and their children. I mentioned earlier that this is a real worry and concern for our candidates, and they began to change their thinking about what it meant to work with parents. They said, I discovered that my assumptions about working with families was predominantly wrong. This is a cool thing, and it helps me in my classroom. So that was another very exciting finding that we found.
So those are just some pieces of the conversation of this whole big area. And so we're interested now in you sharing some of your thoughts around some of the different areas that you see laid out on our handout. And so we're just going to open it up. Scott, you're going to maybe call on folks. Is that the best?
Yeah, let's try. I'm going to unmute everyone.
Okay.
And if you want to speak, you'll have to make sure your mic is on. If you would prefer to type, that's okay too. But what we want to do is, if you want to ask a question, why don't you raise your hand, and then I can call on you, and that way 8 people won't be talking at the same time. Or if you prefer, you can also type a question into the chat, and we'll monitor that as well. So who'd like to ask a question or make a comment? Okay, so here's a question for you, Karen and Tom. I think you can see that. What might this look like for undergrad pre-service teachers who are not student teaching and have limited classroom interaction primarily through service learning projects?
Yeah. You know, I've worked with some undergrad folks not in student teaching, and also some of our degree completion folks. And it can look like asking them to do interviews with parents that have children in schools. So it could be selecting some people at their church who have kids in the local schools that they would get a chance to do some interviewing with. I've done that kind of thing before. The important piece there is that they're hearing the voices and perspectives of families.
We use our human development course to breach this topic of how important it is to work with the families of learners. And as one of the assignments in the human development course that I teach, I have students go find some parents or caregivers of school-age children and interview them with some specific questions about working with the school, how they feel about their child's education, trying to make connections in that way. And those students are not in their clinical practice at that time. And that seems to work well.
Okay. Anyone else have an idea on that you might like to add?
Yeah.
Someone is a really fast typist. Okay.
Yes.
Home visits. Can you speak to home visits,
Yeah.
including problems encountered?
Yeah, actually, we did an interesting project a few years ago with kindergarten teachers who were wanting to begin to do a home visiting project. They happened to be in a center with a lot of social service agencies. It was a really unique situation. And so one of the things we did was we engaged the social service people to help us and help them learn about home visiting and what were the important things that they needed to think about as they set that whole process up, and what did the social service people see as benefits. And it was a fascinating project because the home visiting nurses and the Head Start people have so much experience with home visiting. One of the things that was very interesting to us that came out of that work was that people said the most powerful thing about home visiting for them was the empathy that they developed for families. And this is really interesting to us to right now, because this data that we're looking at, we're beginning to really see that empathy piece emerge. And so we're trying to make sense of how those things go together. But there's something about being in people's home settings that allow you to understand so much more about their life and where they come from and what life is like for them, that folks say is really powerful and can be a shift in the way teachers see students. So I think it's a great practice.
Yeah, and when Karen and I talk about empathy, we're talking about seeing deeply into the perspective and feeling of the other person and coming to understand how they see a topic or how they feel about a topic, and then striving to make a connection to their perspective, to their feelings, rather than trying to overlay your perspective or your feelings on top of that. And we saw that really strongly in our home visit study, and we're beginning to see how it might be a really important part of this assignment process, is to make sure we guide students to that step in engaging with families and community.
Chuck, I see you asked that question. I know that you must have a lot of experience with home visiting. Can you share with us some of your experiences?
Sure. I began a practice of home visiting almost can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Yes, perfect.
I just unmuted myself. I started it in my first elementary principal assignment, and have encouraged teachers to engage in that. Just in the last few years, we have been discouraged through to do these without the presence of a social worker, which is really interesting. I think that has to do with the increasing concern on the part of schools about legal liability. However, I've found them incredibly rich. I started doing it with students that were having difficulties in school, just as a way of showing that we were all together. We're a united front. So my main objective was to first speak with families, and then our parents, and then have a conversation, not a punitive conversation, but just a friendly conversation in the home to show that, yeah, there's this continuity between school and home.
Yeah, a partnership. Yeah, absolutely. Sharon, you've asked a great question here. We have lots of Spanish-speaking parents. How do we help pre-service teachers overcome their hesitancy to get to know non-English speakers? It's a wonderful question, and I would love to hear some folks speak into that.
It's a challenge.
Yeah.
I'll pop in here too and
Yes.
add. I think one of the obvious solutions is to have people in pairs with someone who's a Spanish speaker.
Yeah, sure.
But within our pre-service courses, I think it's difficult. I mean, it's the curricular difficulty of how do you fit all of that in. We have plenty of Latino students who speak Spanish in our pre-service program. But when it comes to thinking about into the future as teachers, as in-service teachers, are limited translation services. So it would be difficult for a lot of our teachers to take a translator with them. So.
And Karen and Tom, note John's comment regarding that as well.
I saw that John had his hand up.
Yeah, John.
Yeah, so, excuse me. So just a statement, I really appreciate this, but I think the whole focus on family and community fits well with, there's research out there, especially with our teacher candidates or teachers who are working in settings where there may be a demographic divide. Often limited exposure, for instance, just a teacher candidate who ends up in a school, it's not enough. They learn to appreciate the students, et cetera, but then there's some research that says then they kind of turn their deficit thinking and stereotypes toward the family in the community, saying, oh, these kids are wonderful, but then it must be the family's fault. It must be the community's fault. So I think that just reinforces the importance of engaging our students in families and communities so that they really are immersed and understand all of that and not just rely on some of the stereotypes and deficit thinking that maybe they brought with them to the program.
One of the things that we see Zeichner has done with his candidates and his team is they've brought community members in panels into their teacher ed classrooms. And so folks that maybe are bilingual and that are very engaged in the community that can help the candidates understand about the community, and also to help them understand what kinds of things that would help them make good connections with people in the community. And so I think that's another strategy that's possible.
Something I should add to 380.
Sleater talks a little bit about how important it is to help, to mediate this kind of work so that candidates are being pointed to their own biases that they may be bringing. because it is possible, as candidates engage with families and communities, for them to just set out to reinforce their own preconceptions about what families and communities are like. And so it's important for us as teacher educators to mediate that work and to point out, look, what you're doing here is you're laying your ideas on what the person said. What can we do to really strive to understand this from their perspective and to go deeply into understanding that? So.
One of the things that we're finding interesting in this latest set of data that we're looking at is that candidates are doing a lot of matching of what they see and hear to what they think. It's all focused on them, which of course is natural for beginners, but being able to help them develop a really true, authentic curiosity for the other, I think is a real challenge, and will take some really good thinking around that area. So I love reading some ideas here. Be sure to speak them out. I mean,
yeah, you have a hand raised.
yeah.
Karen and Tom, go ahead. And by the way, I can save these comments as well and send them out to you so they won't be lost either.
I have my hand raised. This is Joy Meyer from Trinity Christian College.
Hi, Joy.
We've been working with CAPE since 2015 on a project on family engagement.
Oh, lovely.
And it was financed by the Kellogg Foundation, and we were able to work with a number of institutions in Illinois, in Georgia, and Washington, D.C. area. And the foundation let us choose our own project to work on collaboratively.
Ooh.
And thinking about how to engage families. And we met for 3 days and finally decided that one of the ways that we should help our candidates is to help train them on making parent phone calls.
Yes.
And also on parent-teacher conferences.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
So in the next 2 years, we helped CAPE create and pilot modules on making parent phone calls and parent-teacher conferences. That was based on the work of Walker and Dodger. They have 7 elements of highly effective parent engagement.
Mm-hmm.
And the results of which are now some free online modules that any institution can use in training your students on how to make effective parent phone calls, and also effective parent-teacher conferences.
Wonderful.
What might somebody Google in order to reach those online modules?
CAPE Family Engagement.
Okay.
Wonderful.
And Paul says he just used them this week.
Oh, really?
Wonderful.
Yeah, so, and as a result of that, so some of the things we did was have our students make phone calls to parent actors that were hired by CAPE, and to talk about a situation, a problem their student was having. And in the study, they made these phone calls kind of cold without any training on how to engage parents. And our students figured, well, we know how to make phone calls. We talk on the phone all the time. And what they learned was what they didn't know about making a phone call to a parent.
Yeah.
They were highly engaged in the training because of that cold call. Like, they didn't know what to say. They didn't know how the parent would react. The parents were trained actors. They were trained into responding to the students' statements, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
And so now there is materials for doing training in your classes or using the online modules. We are using them in our courses here at Trinity, and are working to strategically have some of our adult learners connect with our traditional students on making these phone calls and practicing parent phone calls.
Ah, that's great.
Joy, can you give me an example of a course where you ask students to practice making phone calls? What course would you use?
We have a senior level course right before student teaching, a methods course. We do it in that course. We've done it also in the introductory courses as well. But I think we're going to land in the senior level class, and then the parent-teacher conference training. We've done it in that senior level class, but we're going to do it in student teaching, actually.
Mm-hmm.
Right when they, that just-in-time learning, here's when I'm needing to use these skills.
Mm-hmm.
And have you guys written an article?
Kelly and I are just meeting about that next week.
Woohoo!
Awesome.
Wonderful.
Yay.
Oh,
If I
that's
could
great.
just piggyback on Kelly Lenars, also from Trinity,
Yes.
on what Joy was saying. The thing that we found, because we also gathered research through surveys when we had our candidates and also practicing teachers do these modules, a part about family engagement that they didn't have the confidence in at the highest level was actually gathering information and listening.
Yeah.
And it really just came down to that basic communication skill. They would get really nervous as the teacher, and so they would just start talking to the parent because they did a good job planning what they needed to say, but they didn't realize they were giving no opportunity to gather information. So of those 7 elements, that was the number one always that both pre-service and practicing teachers came away with. And I think it just tied in really well to what you were saying as far as how do we teach them to engage. I think part of that is to listen.
Yeah, to seek knowledge.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, culturally responsive relationships, one of those steps is teaching them the skill of active listening.
Mm-hmm.
So we're hearing some great skill things here that I think are really important.
Yes, Karen and Tom, we have maybe 10 minutes left at best. And would you take just a minute to reiterate your desire to have the participants and their colleagues draft some manuscripts for the special issue of the journal, and maybe talk about your role in helping that along? And Tom mentioned along the way a couple of particular types of articles that you're looking for, but might you talk about that a little bit now?
Typically, if we were given 20 minutes to teach a topic in a class, we would focus and drill down into some topic. Today, in the few minutes that we had, we've tried to do a broad overview of this topic, because what we would like is you to perhaps see a place where you could plug into this and say, I could write something about this particular area. And so as you look at the handout and you see those different areas that we covered today, you might think about what is the why? Why might a Christian teacher education program be interested in really pursuing this topic? You might be thinking about the literature, or something that you've really connected to, or a diverse perspective, or a critique of a perspective that you feel are driven to write about. You might be thinking about a particular research area that you've been engaged in, such as what Trinity is just talking about, that you could write about something you've been doing. And actually, we love it when we get something. We love really well-written essays, but we love it when we get a submission where research is being presented in a skilled way. That's something that we love to see. And then you might think about an assignment that you have used with candidates that you could share with everybody else and say, hey, I'd just like to share with you this assignment that we've been doing with our candidates in this particular class and how it's been meaningful, or maybe a little research project we've done on the findings from that. You have until tax day to write this little article and turn it in. So it would actually give you some time, if you had an opportunity in a class, to be a researcher practitioner and be gathering data from your students on a particular assignment that you might be doing with them, and then write a little bit about what you're finding. Do a little content analysis of that data and tell us, what are you seeing?
We're really excited about this issue because it really gives us a chance. Boy, we've seen there's interest in making a difference in this area of teacher for preparation. And so this is a chance for us to all put our heads together and to really learn from one another. We have so much more time when we can read each other's work than in a 50-minute quick webinar. So we're so excited about the possibilities here, and just encourage you to share the good work that you're doing in this issue.
You know, I think a Christian teacher education community could be really proud of saying one of the things that's unique about our program that we really put an emphasis on is helping our candidates really connect and build relationships with families. That seems like something to me that could be really driven by our Christian purpose in education, and we could feel really good about that. So I hope that in this issue we see some enthusiasm for this topic that comes out of that Christian mission, that Christian stance and viewpoint.
And we just thank everybody today for participating, and we would love to keep the conversation going. So, you know, feel free to hook up with us, and we would love to share more.
Karen and Tom, there's one more kind of request from Tanya, if you could handle that, and we'll make that the last question, and then we'll sign off, and I'll do the final sign off when you're finished.
Do you see that, Karen?
Who are they inviting?
Can someone speak to the comment about bringing community members in?
I think that I would point you actually to Zeichner's 2016 article, because he talks in detail about bringing in community members. And
Which
so,
is it's on the back of your handout. Two Zeichner resources are there.
Yeah, I think that would give you some great hands-on ideas about how they structured that when they did that work.
And you might find it interesting how they've taken it a step further and striven to do solidarity with their communities, which is an extraordinary investment on their part. And you can read about that in those articles.
Okay. Thank you all very much for participating, and thank you, Karen and Tom, for your wonderful.
Thank you, Scott.
And great ideas. I'm really pleased with the level of participation we had. Adrienne, I'll catch you on that handout, and we will be sending an email out as soon as we get the recording up, so you'll know where to find it, and you can share that with your colleagues and students if you like. Blessings to you all.
What a great gathering. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Merry Christmas, everybody.
Okay, I'm going to sign off now.
All right.